Hear ye, the court of Judge Jessica is now in session. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Today, we are tackling a new issue, which is who has really bungled sports betting worse, Tennessee or New York? I am joined by Play Tennessee site runner Nicole Russo and Play New York site runner Grant Lucas to hash it out in a legislative, judicial, regulatory, all sorts of things debate, because good Lord, these people have messed things up, and I will adjudicate and decide unilaterally who has it worse. Mr. Lucas, I would like to hear your case first as to why New York, who recently passed online sports betting, has messed it up more than anyone else.
Well, I'm not going to use as big of words as you use, but I'll give it a shot. We could start with the fact that the lottery is going to be overseeing a lot of things, or everything, in New York. Aside from the request for proposals, that'll be the New York State Gaming Commission. The lottery is going to be regulating online sports betting in New York, which hasn't worked out too well for the most part. You see states like Virginia, which they could have up to 12 licenses issued. They have 5 now. They just did $250 million in handle in February, boosted by the Super Bowl. But then you get the horror stories like Oregon, which has 1 operator run by the lottery, obviously. And after launching in fall 2019, they just broke even last month. That kind of thing really, really scares away lottery run state sports betting. Then you hear about the number of skins that would be available in New York. We initially heard it could be 2 or 3. Then we heard it's going to be at least 4 total between 2 sports betting platforms, which was exciting because it was more than we thought. But that's also like driving on E, thinking you have 10 miles left before breaking down, and you break down after 15. At mile 11, you were excited, but you knew the inevitable was coming anyway with no gas station in sight. Then you hear about the exclusion of commercial casinos when we all thought they would have some sort of involvement. But as Cuomo called them, they're unnecessary middlemen, which is exactly what you want to hear from your governor, right? So at this point, commercial casinos' sole purpose in mobile sports betting will be to house servers. They're essentially serving as B&Bs for sports betting operators in New York. Then you move on even further, and there's essentially not going to be any tribal involvement. There is some talk about giving tribes preferential treatment with some points methodology system in the RFP process, but it's, as Gary Pretlow called it, gobbledygook, which is like my favorite phrase to use now, because the tribes won't really have much involvement because you got to bid for these licenses to be a platform provider. Then you got to have the partners to be able to give out the skins. And then there's this legal issue that could come up with the 3 gaming tribes. The Oneida Indian Nation has said they might seek legal action because this online sports betting system that is in the budget now, or is passed, would violate the exclusive zone agreement created in 2013 when New York said commercial casinos can come in. So between all of that, from lottery running it to legal action potentially being involved, nothing is really looking good for New York, and they could really stumble hard out of the blocks.
Point of clarification for the gallery, a lower court than Judge Jessica's would be hearing a potential New York case challenge. Mr. Lucas, I would like to understand more. Who are these 4 operators going to be?
It's speculation at this point because, like you said, you need to have some operators and partners in place to be able to give out skins. For New York, there is a leg up for certain platforms and others. Flutter Entertainment is a popular one that likely will have the inside track to land one of the partner platform licenses with the state. You got FanDuel and Fox Bet in that mix that really highlights Flutter. You could potentially consider DraftKings as part of that group. Personally, and I've been told I'm wrong before, I think Kambi could have a leg in there as well when you have Bet Rivers, which is in state, and coincidentally a casino in the state. they also have a few other partners that they could really get involved with. Those are the three that I think would have inside tracks. But again, I've been told I'm wrong before on a number of occasions, and it just hasn't hit home yet.
Well, keep advised that you may be told you're wrong today, because I do. If I can hear from you about the latest on Tennessee's cluster, I think there's some updates since we last spoke.
Yes, Your Honor. And while New York is likely heading for quite a mess, at least they haven't launched yet. In Tennessee, we have a bunch of issues coming 6 months into launch, and we are basically, well, the regulators seem to be like parents that are telling their kids, you're in trouble when I get to 3, but they don't really know what that trouble is when they get to 3. So they're saying we're at 2, 2.5, 2 3/4, because they don't quite know how to enforce some of the rules that they put in place. And my first point is going to be the hold mandate. Tennessee became the very first state to require that sportsbooks hold 10% of wagers. And for those that don't know what hold is, the way that you calculate this is you take the total amount of wagers that come into a sportsbook, you subtract out what the sportsbooks pay to those winning bettors, take that number and divide it by the total amount of wagers once again to get your percent. On a national average, we're seeing somewhere around that 6 to 8%. And for sportsbooks to hit 10, that's going to be difficult. And we see that these numbers are fluctuating already. November, they hit 10, they went back down, they hit 10 again, they went back down. It's been a roller coaster. The thing is, the lottery doesn't know what to do with the sportsbooks that don't hit that mandate. So at first they said, all right, we're going to impose a $20,000 fine. Not that serious. If you're DraftKings or FanDuel, you'll pay that in a second. Then they said, well, if it's egregious, if we feel like it's an egregious violation of the rules, we're going to suspend a sportsbook license. We don't know what egregious is. Egregious could be 0.5%, it could be 5%. We're just kind of waiting on pins and needles to see what they decide. Everything is very subjective. And speaking of potential operators getting their license suspended, Tennessee had the first one ever in the US market just last month, when a local sportsbook, Action 24/7, had its license suspended over issues of proxy betting, money laundering, and credit card fraud happening on the site. Now, many would say, hey, kudos to the TEL for acting swiftly and for suspending that operator's license to make sure that Tennesseans are safe. However, the regulators bungled their own policy and procedure when it came to the meeting that they held in order to suspend that sportsbook, causing the suspension to be overturned in a court of law because they didn't follow their own procedures, and Action 24/7 won their lawsuit against the regulators. However, we don't really know what's going to happen next. This sportsbook is back up and running. It doesn't really seem like regulators are taking too keen of an interest to rush to get them suspended again until these issues are resolved. So really things have been up in the air. And ever since this suspension, you now have a ton of new bills flooding the market from lawmakers trying to kind of help some of the problems that we've seen come up in the first 6 months. So for example, one of the new bills on the Senate floor looks to prohibit somebody wagering in the same location where they have a payday loan out. This makes sense when you realize that recently the lottery approved Advance Financial, which is a payday loan center, as a deposit and withdrawal location for Action 24/7. Then Action 24/7 got into some hot water. Lawmakers thought, this seems a little bit too risky for our responsible gaming measures, and are now trying to backtrack and get that approval for Advance Financial as a vendor taken away. So really, it's been a lot of push to get things out and going, and then backtracking once we've realized things haven't quite worked as we thought in the first 6 months.
Thank you, Ms. Russo. I have a question about how much revenue the state has gotten from sports betting so far.
Yeah,
Not the operator, the state.
Gotcha. Yeah. So Tennessee does enact a 20% sports betting tax on on revenue for those sports books. To date, well, not exactly to date, but as of March, it is over $12 million in taxes for the state. That includes 80% going to the Lottery for Education account, 15% going to local infrastructure projects, and 5% going to programs for responsible gaming throughout the state. In addition to that 20% tax rate, operators do have to pay a $750,000 app licensing fee plus a $50K renewal fee each year once they are granted the license in Tennessee.
So, is it safe to suggest that to date, it's been about $20 million for Tennessee?
I think that's a fair assumption.
Mr. Lucas, I'd like you to address this. Does the New York model project higher than $20 million in tax revenue and licensing fees for the first 6 months?
Yes, quite a bit actually. So the licensing for a sports betting partner is set at $25 million itself, which is easily highest in the country. The governor's budget right now also includes $99 million in revenue from online sports betting this fiscal year. And theoretically, that could get above $500 million by 2024. And when you factor in the outrageous 50%, maybe 55% tax on gross gaming revenue, that's kind of feeding that projection.
Those numbers are the loftiest, highest numbers imaginable, right? Whereas in reality, 300 million versus $500 million probably makes more sense.
It would. To get to $500 million, you really have to consider all that needs to go into it. I mean, operators themselves would need to gross about $1 billion in total gross gaming revenue to reach that 500 million mark, which seems virtually improbable, we'll say. So that these numbers seem really, really high and maybe a little too lofty to actually reach.
All right, and Ms. Russo, one more question for you. The lottery does indeed regulate in Tennessee, even though it may not operate as well like it does in New York.
Correct. So the Tennessee Education Lottery does regulate both forms of legal gambling in the state, which are the lottery itself and sports betting. From a regulation standpoint, I mean, it's been a pretty fair market. You have unlimited operators that can come into the state compared to New York, a very cheap licensing fee. I mean, almost pennies on the dollar here. And you have an online only market, which operators love, ease of access. There are no casinos in Tennessee. The issue isn't really the market or the Tennessee, the market itself. It's the lottery going back and trying to enforce some of the penalties and some of the rules that they set in place when making the regulations.
In other words, the people regulating perhaps don't know as much about sports betting as other states.
Correct. There is a sports wagering committee that is part of the TEL, but there are not a ton of people on that committee that actually have any experience operating a sports book. And the one that did have experience in sports books just left the company. So the problem is that you just don't have a lot of people that know what they're doing with sports, and they really know what they're doing with the lottery, trying to make them both work in the same committee and the same council.
Interesting. Well, my bailiff and I are going to retire to chambers momentarily, and I will be back with my rule. I have to say that by and large, when it comes to sports betting, I am generally going to say that the non-monopoly, non-lottery run model like Tennessee has, even though the lottery regulates, they're not the operator, is obviously the more with it and together organization. However, in this instance, there is a strong consideration that I ask myself, is it better to have a crappy system that is regulated well, or a good system that is regulated arguably poorly? And with that in mind, knowing that the New York Lottery is associated with the New York Gaming Commission, who will ideally have people in place who know what they are doing, and with the blind, likely stupid optimism that there is still wiggle room to fix the cluster in New York, whereas Tennessee is now relying on state legislators to fix their faux pas, I am going to rule that indeed Tennessee is the bigger cluster. Judge Jessica has ruled. Or are you going to appeal, Mr. Lucas?
I would like to appeal. Yes, I would like to file an appeal.
On what grounds?
New York hasn't even launched yet. We're basing it just on pure speculation and what could happen, what couldn't happen. There is a lot that could.
The regulation will be equally crappy there.
Yes.
All right, that's fair. If it turns out, I will hear this appeal. In the meantime, court is dismissed.